Hi, this is Eric Anderton, and welcome to this edition of the Construction Leaders Podcast. Today, we're going to talk about how to escape mediocrity and achieve high performance in your construction company. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Construction Leaders Dashboard. The dashboard is a tool that I've used with my clients for many years to help the leadership in their company get crystal clear on the critical items they need to focus on in order to achieve high performance on a regular basis. If you'd like your own copy of the Construction Leaders Dashboard, go to my website, ericanderton.com/C as in cat, L as in Larry, D as in dog. That's ericanderton.com/CLD, and download your free copy of the Construction Leaders Dashboard. Once you've downloaded it, you'll be able to follow step-by-step along with the instructions, fill it out for yourself, get clarity and focus so that you can perform at the highest level possible. So welcome to the show here today. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is achieving high performance. And as we kick off, we want to ask the question, what is high performance? So here's a very strong definition. Concentrating on the few tasks that, if done with excellence, will really make a difference in the results of your job and in the performance of your company. Please keep that definition in mind as we go through the process here today. And I'd like to begin with a little game because we're going to use the example of high-performing athletes to help us to understand how we can achieve high performance in our construction companies. So the game is Name the Player, and the sport is Major League Baseball. So I hope you like baseball, and if you don't, I'm sure you'll be able to follow along anyway. This player has 3 World Series appearances. He has a 4-0 lifetime record in the World Series and a .25 lifetime ERA. So in other words, he kicks butt in the World Series. In 2014, he pitched 1 complete game, 1 shutout, and he had 1 save, and he was the World Series MVP. Who is this player? Well, if you live in Northern California, you know that the player's name is Madison Bumgarner. In 2014, he had a historic pitching effort in the World Series of the San Francisco Giants against the Kansas City Royals. And here we have him entering the game in Game 7 of the 2014 World Series. Now, the World Series is a best-of-7 format. That means that it was a win or go home game. So in other words, whichever team won the game, they won the World Series. Now, what's interesting is that 3 days prior to Game 7, Bumgarner had pitched a complete game shutout. And it was extremely unusual for him to come in Game 7 and pitch again. And what's interesting is here, if you're looking at the video version of this, he's entering the game in the 5th inning of 9 innings, with the Giants clinging to a 3-2 lead. And what kind of environment is he entering in where he will be expected to perform at the highest possible level? Well, he's in Kansas City. They're playing the Kansas City Royals, and he stands on the pitcher's mound surrounded by 40,000 plus people who have one intention for him, and that is for him to fail miserably. And in this environment, pressure-packed, he was expected to perform at a high level. How did he manage to perform at a high level in this kind of environment? What did he concentrate on? Well, you see him here doing something very simple in a certain way, and that is throwing the ball or pitching the ball. And what he concentrated on was one simple action. The outcome that he was seeking was to win the baseball game. But in order to achieve that outcome, he had to focus on one simple action, and that action was throwing hard strikes. He concentrated again and again on simply throwing hard strikes. And he got to the bottom of the 9th with 2 outs. In a baseball game, if you get 3 outs, you're out of the inning. So he was 1 out away from winning the World Series. He pitched magnificently, the Giants still clinging to that 3-2 lead. And he made a pitch, and one of the guys who was up to bat, he hit a looping line drive to left center field. And if you remember the game, which most of you probably don't, but I do, since I'm a Giants fan, what happened is there was this looping line drive to left center field. The center fielder came in on the ball, and he was caught between two minds. Should I field the ball on a bounce and limit the guy to a single, or should I make a spectacular dive and catch the ball, be the hero, and record the final out and win the World Series for the Giants? And you can see that he was caught between two minds. Should I catch the ball on a bounce, or should I attempt to catch the ball while it was still in the air? And because he was between two minds, he did neither. The ball went by him and bounced all the way to the fence, where the left fielder, his name is Juan Perez, came to get the ball, and he kicked it. It's an amazing thing. These guys are professional baseball players playing at the top of their game, and here they are making rookie little league mistakes in these high pressure environments. And so this guy who hit a looping line drive that should have been no more than a single, he got all the way around to third. Now think for a moment. If you're Bumgarner and you've just pitched the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and most of the 9th inning without giving up any runs, at the top of your game, completely controlling yourself, doing your very best, and then two of your teammates make these stupid mistakes, how would you feel? Well, if you remember the Charlie Brown cartoon, Peanuts, whenever something went wrong for him in the baseball game, he would stand all alone on the top of the mound, and he would let out a big cry of despair. So how do you perform in pressure situations, particularly when things don't go your way? Because you think about how a construction project should go. At the beginning, you get the plans, and you begin to study them. You get familiar with them. You get to the job site. You build the project. You then put a bow on the project at the end of it, and it's supposed to go just so nice and easy and clean and smooth. Yeah, right. It doesn't go like that at all, does it? Because in a construction project, the reality is that there's multifaceted things going on. There are uncertainties, there's unknowns, there's many people involved, right? There's subcontractors, owners, suppliers, general contractors, construction managers, all these people involved in a project, and there's only so much that you have control over. And despite all of that, you're supposed to perform at a high level. And there's some things that you have absolutely no control over, like the weather. There's some things that you have some control over, and then there's some things that you have complete control over. Your job as a construction professional is to identify the things that you have complete control over and focus on doing your very best job of those things so that you maximize the possibility of you achieving the outcomes that you're looking for. Okay? Now remember, high performance defined is concentrating on the few tasks that, if done with excellence, will really make a difference in the results of your job and in the performance of your company. So let's take a project manager, for instance. What are the outcomes that the project manager is responsible for? Well, I'd like to say one pretty simple one is to bring the project in on time and ideally under budget. And what are the tasks then that the project manager must focus on in order to achieve that? Well, there are tasks around schedule, cost, safety, and quality. There's tons of tasks that the project manager is responsible for in order to achieve the outcome of a project on time and under budget. And he has certain tools to execute those tasks, mainly a phone. He's got email. He's got visits to the job site. He's got negotiations with his project partners. He's got communication from the field to the office. All of these tasks that he's responsible for in order to achieve the outcome of bringing a project in on time and under budget. So let me ask you this. What are the top 3 outcomes that you're expected to achieve in your position? Whether you're an estimator, whether you're a project manager, a project engineer, superintendent, a foreman, perhaps you're the president of the company. Reflect for a moment, and if you're not driving, write down what are the top 3 outcomes you're expected to achieve in your position. If you are driving, by the way, you can go to the website and download a PDF with this very simple framework so that you can work through it afterwards. What are the top 3 outcomes you're expected to achieve in your position? Okay, now I'd like you to pick the most important outcome. In your position, what is the most important outcome that you are expected to achieve? Okay, now I'd like you now to think about the top 3 tasks that lead to that most important outcome. In other words, what do you need to do in order to achieve the outcome? And then I'd like you to pick the most important task that leads to the most important outcome. Going back to the Bumgarner illustration, the baseball one, right? His most important outcome was to win the game. And his most important task that led to that most important outcome was controlling the quality and the consistency of his pitching, throwing hard strikes, in other words. Okay? So after you have achieved, you've picked your most important outcome, identify your most important task, and then ask this question. And this is a key question, so listen up. In what specific ways can you improve your performance of that task? That is a powerful question. And let me explain why. It has the word specific in it, and it's designed to focus your thinking on practical, concrete, straightforward things that you can do to improve the performance of the most important task that leads to the most important outcome. So let me give you an example. I have a client who does a lot of prefabrication before they go to the job site. And one of the guys who is in their organization, his name is Dave, and he's in charge of the quality control in the fab shop. And I was doing a leadership development class with the leadership of this construction company. Dave was in the class. And by the way, if your construction company needs any help with leadership development, contact me. Go to my website and get hold of me. I'm happy to chat with you about a very powerful program I've put together specifically for construction companies to help them with leadership development. And Dave identified 3 outcomes that were most important to him as the quality control expert, so to speak, in the fab shop. The first one was good quality work. The second one was educate fitters and welders in building codes. And the third one was have inspectors on site when they are needed. In other words, schedule the inspectors so they can check the product that was being produced so that it would be ready to go out into the field. Okay? So those were the 3 outcomes. I then asked him to pick the most important outcome. Which one do you think he picked? Well, Dave picked good quality work. Good quality work was the most important outcome that he is responsible for. So then the next question I asked him is pick the top 3 tasks that lead to the outcome of good quality work. And Dave came up with 3 things. Number 1, accurate measurements. Number 2, attention to detail. And number 3, spreading knowledge to the other folks who work for him. Okay? So then the question was, what is your most important task that then leads to your most important outcome? And he picked the task, accurate measurements. So in order to produce good quality work, which is the outcome, the most important task to lead to that outcome is accurate measurements. Now, I really like that. Dave was super clear on what his most important task was that leads to his most important outcome. Now, I then asked, in what specific ways can you improve your performance of that task, of accurate measurements? And what Dave did then is he spent just 2 minutes writing down as many ideas as he could come up with to answer that question. And this is what he came up with. First thing is take time to read and understand what I'm measuring. So if he's going to be accurate in his measurement, he has to take time to read and understand what it is that he's actually measuring. Number 2 is establish what he calls running dimensions. And that's just a technical term familiar to him. It doesn't mean anything to me. It probably may not mean much to you, but that's what he needed to do. Establish running dimensions. The third thing was ensure that his equipment is up to par. So if he's going to have accurate measurements, he has to read and understand what he's measuring, establish running dimensions, ensure his equipment is up to par, and have the correct equipment for the job. So that was specifically how he could improve his performance of the task of accurate measurements that led to his most important outcome. Then he asked him to pick the most important one of those ideas, and he picked ensure my equipment is up to par. So then he was able to build a very, very simple structure to remind himself of what to focus on in order to achieve high performance. He identified his most important outcome, good quality work. He then asked the question, what is the most important task that leads to my most important outcome? And that's accurate measurements. And then he asked, how can I improve my performance of this task? And he answered, ensure my equipment is up to par. So for him to achieve high performance, he wanted to focus in on ensuring his equipment was up to par so that he could get accurate measurements so that that would result in good quality work. And this is exactly how Dave focused in on achieving high performance. And I tell you, think through that in your position. What is your most important outcome? What is your most important task? How can you improve your performance of that task? In other words, what can you do that's measurable and concrete and specific? Okay, now let's go back to the bottom of the ninth with 2 outs. The guy hits the looping line drive to left center field. He gets all the way to third base. Madison Bumgarner had a choice. He could despair and freak out over how he had done his very best to achieve the outcome by throwing hard strikes and focusing in on controlling his performance. He could freak out, blame the other people for their failure, or he could simply go right back to throwing hard strikes and concentrating on the things that he could control in order to achieve the outcome that he was looking for. And what he did is he began to throw strike after strike to the next batter, and the next batter eventually popped up to the third baseman, good old Pablo Sandoval, and the Giants won their 3rd World Series in 5 years. Now, I submit to you that regardless of whether or not Madison Bumgarner would have won that game, because he didn't have complete control over the outcome, he focused in on the things that he could control. He focused in on performing at the highest level the tasks that led to the most important outcome of winning the game. And his most important task was throwing hard strikes, and he achieved that at the highest possible level. Now, let me give you some choices that high performers make as we wrap up this podcast. And this is from a gentleman named Harvey Dorfman. And he wrote a book called The Mental Game of Baseball, which I will link to in the show notes. I encourage you to read that book. It is brilliant. High performers choose to be early rather than just on time or late. High performers choose to want to learn rather than want to explain or excuse. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to throw this up on a PDF on my website that's connected to the show, and you can go and download that as well. High performers choose to do more rather than just enough or less. High performers choose to be mentally tough rather than mentally lazy or intimidated. High performers choose to concentrate on what to do rather than what may result. They choose to be aggressive rather than passive or submissive. High performers choose to know their limitations rather than try to do more than they're capable of. High performers choose to think about solutions rather than worry about problems. High performers choose to accept adversity as part of the game and of life rather than magnify the adverse conditions and seek sympathy. They choose to share with and help others rather than be selfish. They choose to think and act positively rather than negatively. So now it's time for you to get to work. How can you use and apply this podcast in your life? A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. That's the classic Patton quote that I always like to repeat. So think about the top 3 outcomes you're expected to achieve in your position. Pick the most important outcome. Ask yourself, what are the top 3 tasks that lead to that outcome? Pick the most important task Ask yourself, in what specific ways can we improve? Can I improve my performance of that task? Identify some specific ways, pick the most important way, and build an action plan around that. My name is Eric Anderton. I hope you enjoyed this presentation of how to achieve high performance in your construction company. If you'd like to contact me, feel free to. My website is ericanderton.com. I'm on LinkedIn. If you go to my website, ericanderton.com/podcast, and look up this podcast episode, you can get all the resources that I mentioned, all the PDFs and things like that. And again, this is brought to you by the Construction Leaders Dashboard. If you'd like to get a copy of the Construction Leaders Dashboard, simply go to my website, ericanderton.com/C as in cat, L as in Larry, D as in David, and grab your Construction Leaders Dashboard. I tell you, I really appreciate you listening to this podcast today. If you could please share it with other construction professionals, I would be deeply appreciative. And give me some reviews there on iTunes. I need some reviews so that it gets up on the iTunes review board and all that good stuff. Anyway, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you here today. And if you have any questions, again, contact me. My name is Eric Anderton. Thanks for listening.